I'm going to be reading again from my book, Mind and Evolution, as assessed through reviews of major texts. This time, Mind and Nature by Gregory Bateson, 1978. I suspect the ideas the younger Bateson is known for he actually got from his father, a brilliant biologist active at the beginning of the 20th century, William Bateson. We commonly think of animals and plants as matter, but they are really systems through which matter is constantly passing. Gregory recalls that his father was always trying to catch that component of nature that we might as well call mind. In the course of careers in several different fields, Gregory Bateson came to inhabit these ways of thinking about mind and nature and make them his own. In 1978, at the age of 75, in Mind and Nature, he tried to communicate them. For me, the result is an almost impenetrably tangled muddle. Over the half-lifetime since it was written, I've tackled this book a few times, each time admitting defeat. But on rereading it once again, I find I had, after all, absorbed some of the ways of his thinking. I describe it below as I see it now. Bateson yearned to introduce us to a natural order profoundly different from the physical order we're all familiar with. That physical order is ordinary physical stuff, as science describes it in terms of matter and physical processes, deterministic and predictable. His natural order is about living things in their non-physical aspect. He gives that aspect the form he calls patterns of connection. Those patterns involve matter, they are patterns in matter, but you can replace the matter they're made of without altering them. Remember, the molecules we're made of are said to get replaced every few months or years, so we've come to consist of almost entirely new matter, yet to us we remain the same. Apply that to all of nature, seeing it as patterns of connection that can maintain themselves indefinitely without loss, that can even develop new levels of complexity in complex hierarchies, those in levels above connecting the stacks below, and you get a glimpse of Bateson's world. For him, this is not metaphor. Nature does consist of matter, but to understand it, you must appreciate how it also consists of patterns of connection. Note that Bateson titled the book Mind and Nature. Why mind? Bateson had come to recognize in mind patterns of connection similar to those he had discerned in evolved nature. Quote, if you want to understand mental process, look at biological evolution, and conversely, if you want to understand biological evolution, go look at mental process. In fact, for him, every pattern of connection was associated with mind. Mind was an integral part of the natural order. Not conscious mind. He had little respect for that, too linear in operation, too subject to distortion by culture. Unconscious, natural mind, such as he urged us to cultivate. So far, I'm carried along, pleased to see this alternative of thinking about evolution well represented, but eventually a nagging doubt must be acknowledged. Are these patterns of connection real, or are they merely a heuristic device to make us feel smarter? No doubt Bateson thought they were real. He describes them in general terms as interlinked physical feedback systems, alternations of form and process, towering in great hierarchies, upper levels taking over where lower levels came under stress, as if he can picture them. But apart from some irrelevant physical analogues such as 3D vision and moire patterns, he comes up with no examples. There is very little mention in his book of life in the wild, no mention of particular species or interactions between species. I'm afraid this is all no more than, as I feared, heuristics. Perhaps for this reason the book made little impression in its day, but that's a pity. Bateson was just too early. Computers have since then become extremely efficient at detecting patterns of connection. Think of Amazon, Google, and Netflix being able to predict from all their sales data and your previous purchases what cluster of items you're likely to want next. Think of IBM's Watson being able to beat human experts at Jeopardy. Think of a computer given 1 million pictures with and 1 million pictures without a human face. It may well come up with a subroutine distinguishing between them that programmers can label face. When they say, search for face, the computer will find faces in photos better than humans can. Through this kind of programming, computers have already found ways to distinguish cancer cells from non-cancerous cells. Bateson's patterns of connection are becoming a staple of modern digital industries. If you lack the talent yourself, that programming is now available as an online service you can purchase in the cloud. Once a computer identifies patterns of connection in data for us, we can visualize them in the form of charts and diagrams. I remember data from a study of obesity being expressed in maps, patterns of connection, showing onset of cases of obesity coinciding closely with who obese people spoke to by phone. Passing on brand names of foods or drugs, perhaps? Another example, space shuttle data graphed in terms of mishaps against temperature at time of launch showed Challenger should not have been cleared to launch that chilly morning. A pity NASA's computers hadn't been instructed to identify and present for inspection such patterns earlier. How long can it be before modern computing power is applied to search for patterns of connection in the fossil record, in natural environments, in neuroscience, and Bateson will be vindicated? But this is not, I believe, what Bateson wanted. He wanted us to learn how, through appreciation of the natural order, we could gain in natural grace and wisdom about ourselves. Unfortunately, he was grossly inept at communicating it. At the end of the book is included an impassioned appeal that Bateson made to a Californian committee on education policy, that education be brought more in line with his insights. It is haughty and incoherent. Much of it reads as if someone tossed his book into a shredder and pasted up fragments of it at random. Seeing how completely he misjudged his audience and mangled that message may help us make our way through his book. I recommend reading chapter 7 first, then chapter 5. That's all. The rest, which is intended to be instructional, I found only maddening and confusing. I think in that review I failed to explain what Bateson's patterns of connection mean to me in terms of evolution. What they mean to me is what evolves is not one or another gene or a mutation or a characteristic, but entire patterns of connection. I can suggest this by what I listed in my review of Richard Dawkins' Climbing Mount Improbable as what the evolution of a new gene demanded. Here's how I put it. First, code for a new gene is added to the genome, typically as long segments of code scattered along it. Then a messenger RNA also has to be created, equipped to identify those segments, gather them together, recognize any inserts that need to be deleted and delete them before that code gets delivered to a ribosome. Also needed is something able to send a signal saying, start executing that code. And in some cases, a system must be built into the body for delivery of the product to register when the necessary change has been carried out, and to return a signal saying, turn the code off. For the gene to operate at the appropriate stage in development, it must be slotted into a schedule, and if it's specific to a particular tissue, it must be turned on there and off everywhere else. Finally, the code may have to be marked as conserved, that is, protected from further mutations. That's no more than road directions to a real pattern of connection. A real pattern of connection is a complex living thing involving multiple tissues with a life of its own. I imagine it as a living envelope, one of a host making up an actual creature. That's what I imagine has to evolve, that host of envelopes making up a real creature. And not just in the adult creature, but as clouds of envelopes growing, succeeding one another as the embryo develops. What has to evolve is the entire cloud of successive patterns of connection, each brought into existence exactly on schedule to provide the platform for the development of the next. It's enormously complex, yet tightly controlled. That's how I get from Bateson's patterns of connection a measure of what the evolution of a living creature involves.